First-hand account of the destruction caused by Putin's war. As heavy shelling on key cities continues, our correspondent has been to one village and witnessed the aftermath of the indiscriminate Russian attacks.
What we're seeing here is the true face of this Russian invasion. President Putin doesn't seem to care whether civilians are caught by his shells and rockets. He's not liberating this country, he's destroying it.
The warning: Putin is far from done, and despite so-called peace talks, there is worse to come. IKEA and the Co-op join the backlash against Russia's invasion. And on the eve of the Winter Paralympics, a dramatic U-turn. Russian and Belarusian athletes are now banned.
This is the ITV Evening News with Lucrezia Millarini.
Good evening. We start tonight with a shocking eyewitness report showing how Russian forces have all but destroyed one Ukrainian village. It is yet more worrying evidence that innocent civilians are being deliberately targeted. Our correspondent Dan Rivers travelled to what was once the peaceful village of Yakivlivka, south of Kharkiv. There's nothing to suggest it was a military target, and yet the community who lived there were hit by 4 separate airstrikes and people were killed. And a warning that Dan's report contains very upsetting images.
At first glance, it appears a peaceful sanctuary, which is why those bombed out of Kharkiv sought refuge here. But a closer look shows the village of Yakivlivka was anything but safe. Last night it was devastated by what locals say were 4 Russian airstrikes, and this was the result. The body of Victor lies in front of the home where he perished. As firemen search for that of his wife Oksana, still buried under its ruins. What we're seeing here is the true face of this Russian invasion. President Putin doesn't seem to care whether civilians are caught by his shells and rockets. He's not liberating this country, he's destroying it. There is no hearse for the bodies. 1 week on, and this war has already robbed the dead of their dignity and left the living seething with fury. Putin, you should die, he says. In Natasha's garden, they're sifting the rubble for anything worth salvaging. She was sheltering 9 people in her home, including several young children. Their car had been shot as they ran the gauntlet from the city.
And 2 children were here.
She shows me where they were sleeping when the first missile hit. The shockwave ripped through every room, lacerating them all with glass.
Это так страшно. Война – это очень страшно. И пусть матеря, которые не понимают, которых нет информации в России, что здесь творится, и их детей тоже здесь убивают. Их убивают здесь детей. Они пушечное мясо. Мы пушечное мясо. Они пушечное мясо. Ребята, надо... В стране, в мире должен быть мир. Люди должны жить, а не разбирать завалы. Мы же не должны разбирать завалы. Где жить? Как жить? Это же страшно.
У нас Яковлевка находится длинная,
да очень страшно.
длинный ров.
Across the street, a garden hewn apart by the impact. The blast so powerful it overturned cars, the crater so deep you could bury one inside it. People are left sifting through what's left without the support of any aid agencies, wondering what will come next. As the shelling continues to echo across this shattered community. There is no obvious military target here, just a village which tried to offer shelter to those in need. Dan Rivers, ITV News, Eastern Ukraine.
This is how the situation looks on the ground tonight, 8 days after Russia started the invasion. The UK's Ministry of Defence believes these shaded areas are now under Russian control, and these major cities are currently encircled by the Russians. And this is the direction the troops seem to be advancing in. The 40-mile-long Russian military convoy heading towards Kyiv remains around 20 miles from the capital. The city itself has been hit by further airstrikes. And despite peace talks resuming today, they are worrying signs there is still much more fighting ahead. Following a long telephone call with President Putin, French President Emmanuel Macron concluded Russia's leader wants to take control of Ukraine. From Kyiv, here's our Europe editor, James Mates.
A week of fighting and the only message from Moscow, things are going to get worse. Worse than this in the centre of Kharkiv, a modern 21st century city. Really? Worse for the residents who must go outside to get food and supplies, all the time risking this. I'm confident this hysteria will pass, he said. Our Western partners will get over it. There's no other way of putting it. The southern city of Kherson is the first to fall to the Russians. Armoured vehicles and troops now pictured patrolling the streets. The mayor telling residents to obey Russian rules.
They're telling people to stay inside, shooting in the air.
Zanish Hussein showed us by Skype the view outside his apartment window.
When you look at a soldier out of your window and you have this feelings that probably this is the man who killed a lot of civilians like me in last 1 week, that makes me scared. Like you are living next to someone who is dangerous, who does not care about your life, who will kill you, and they're not accountable for anything.
The peace talks have resumed once again. The Ukrainians on the left here in Kharkiv. The Russians, presumably in line with their claim this isn't really a war, opting for business suits. Ukraine's President Zelensky says he is now in regular contact with President Biden.
We have good contact. I can tell the truth. And it's a pity that it began after the beginning of this war, but we have it, and my appreciation to him and to his team.
The Russian Defense Ministry has released more video of troops and armor streaming towards Kiev. Of course, much of their advance doesn't look like this. It's bogged down or broken down. But even so, it will get there. And when it does, already in Kiev's western suburbs, civilians and their buildings are learning what it's like to be in the path of a Russian military advance.
And James, President Putin has been speaking today, and some developments from the peace talks.
Yes, so let's talk about the Putin speech first, addressing his Security Council and through them the nation. He said he continued to believe that Russians and Ukrainians were the same people, and he said that the heavy casualties are because the Ukrainians are Nazis and the Russian troops are taking casualties themselves trying to prevent it. He also went on to claim that this special operation in Ukraine is going according to plan and in compliance with the timetable. Now, earlier he made the phone call to President Macron in which he made it clear, according to the French account of this, that he wants to take over the whole of Ukraine. Macron pretty much told him that he was lying to himself, but again concluded that actually his ambition here is to take over the whole of Ukraine, which of course doesn't augur well for the peace talks that are going on right now. The only thing that has come out of it, and it's an important thing, is that both sides agree that they are accepting the principle of establishing humanitarian corridors backed by local ceasefires in order to get civilians out of the worst of the fighting. Where they're going to go when they leave, it's not at all clear, and it doesn't augur well for what's going to happen to the towns that they leave.
All right, James, in Kyiv, thank you. More names and pictures of those killed in the war have emerged today. Ukrainian policeman Oleg Fedko was out on patrol when his wife and 2 children were killed in the Kherson region. His parents were also shot dead. It's claimed Russian soldiers opened fire on the cars they were travelling in. Roman Brodsky was an Israeli-Ukrainian. The father of two was trying to leave Ukraine through Moldova. It's been reported he was killed by Ukrainians at a checkpoint. And the International Federation of Journalists confirmed Yevgeny Sakun, a correspondent and cameraman, was killed in the Russian shelling of the TV tower in Kyiv on Tuesday. Still ahead, more retailers join the backlash against the invasion. Plus, on the eve of the Winter Paralympics, Russian and Belarusian athletes are banned. That's after the break. Welcome back. The growing global backlash against Russia's invasion has been joined by several more big-name businesses. IKEA has suspended operations in Russia and Belarus. Marks & Spencer has stopped shipments, and the Co-op has removed Russian vodka from its shelves. For our business editor, Joel Hills is here. Joel, the backlash really now snowballing, isn't it?
Yeah, the Western companies are retreating from Russia and in large numbers. Some are expressing outrage at how Putin's government is behaving, but there are strong practical and reputational reasons for wishing to withdraw. In IKEA's case, it's closing its 17 stores in Russia with immediate effect. 12,000 staff there will be on paid leave, hoping that this is only a temporary situation. Marks & Spencer is stopping supplies to its 48 shops. They'll continue to stay open. They're run by a franchise partner, but eventually they'll run out of stock and have to close if this situation persists. What is happening is absolutely extraordinary. Remember, Western global brands have only been able to operate in Russia for the last 30 years. McDonald's was one of the first to open. It opened its first restaurant in Moscow in 1990 as the Soviet Union was collapsing. As you can see here, there was no shortage of customers. No comment from McDonald's tonight, but Russians will soon be unable to buy Apple iPhones, Nike trainers, Volkswagen cars, and to make matters worse, the value of the ruble has slumped, driving up inflation. The Russian economy may not be on the verge of a collapse, but what you're seeing is choice, availability, price, affordability being hit in a way that many ordinary Russians will find devastating.
All right, Joel, thank you. Well, some news just in. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has added 2 more Russians to the sanctions list. They are Russian billionaire Alisher Usmanov, whose commercial links to Everton Football Club have been suspended, and former Russian Deputy Prime Minister Igor Shuvalov. A number of refugees fleeing the war in Ukraine have been met with another setback as the train they were travelling on came off the rails in Poland. It was carrying around 50 refugees, including women and children, from the border crossing of Krushenko to Tarnów in southeast Poland. Our team were the only crew at the scene. I've been told by police nobody has been injured. The fundraising appeal has been launched by the UK's Disasters Emergency Committee to help more than 1 million refugees. 15 British charities have joined forces to ask for donations. The Queen has already made a donation, and that appeal follows our programme. Russia and Belarus are facing further sporting isolation after Winter Paralympics organisers banned their athletes from the Games. Initially, they were told they could compete as neutrals. So here's our sports editor, Steve Scott.
It was some about turn. Yesterday, they were in, albeit as neutrals. Today, during final rehearsals for the opening ceremony, Russia and Belarus were kicked out, despite Paralympic bosses insisting that was never an option. So why?
The situation in the athletes' village is escalated and has now become untenable. To the para-athletes from the impacted countries, we are very sorry that you're affected by the decisions that your government took last week in breaching the Olympic truce.
Ever since the Russian delegation arrived, the British team and others have been lobbying to get them excluded, but they deny any behind-the-scenes threats of boycotts.
We were obviously speaking to the athletes, and their focus, as you would expect, has been on finalising their preparation, finalising their training for the first competition starting on Saturday. So we didn't have any British athletes who told us they wouldn't line up against Russian or Belarusian athletes.
Belarusian Paralympic medalist Yuri Holub, who is visually impaired, was due to take part in the Nordic skiing. He's heartbroken.
Я в политику не влажу, потому что я в ней не разбираюсь, но я против войны, и мы все надеялись, что вот эти спортивные мероприятия, Паралимпийские игры, как-то примирят людей, как-то объединят, как-то укрепят дружбу, но, к сожалению, этого не произошло, и мы, конечно, очень расстроены.
Russian Paralympic bosses have called today's decision monstrous and are appealing it in the courts. The chaos in Beijing that has dominated these games in the past few days is not over yet. Steve Scott, ITV News.
Before we go, an update on the little girl we featured last night in desperate need of cancer treatment after fleeing Ukraine with her mother. When our crew met the 4-year-old, she was being cared for in a makeshift clinic inside a shopping centre on the Polish border with Ukraine. But we now understand she is receiving chemotherapy after being moved to a special oncology centre in Poland. And that's it. Julie's here with the latest from Ukraine after the football. But from me and all the team, bye-bye.